My name is Alara Vance. I am 54 years old, and for most of my adult life, I have lived by the rhythm of the rain in Portland, Oregon. My home is a small craftsman bungalow in the Laurel Hist neighborhood, with a garden that is my quiet sanctuary and a porch swing that has held me through 2 decades of joys and sorrows. For 20 of those years, my professional life, my identity, was woven into the very fabric of a company called Ethelgard Technologies. I was there at the beginning, when Ethelgard was just 4 of us in a chilly, perpetually damp sublet space in an old brick building in the Pearl District. The air smelled of wet concrete and ozone from the humming servers we'd built ourselves from scavenged parts. We shared lukewarm coffee from a single, stained pot and a fierce, unshakable belief that we could build something to change how the world understood information. And we did. I was the architect of that dream, the one who translated our shared vision into lines of code. They called me the Principal Systems Weaver, a title I'd chosen myself because it felt right. I wasn't just engineering. I was weaving together disparate threads of data into a coherent, beautiful, and powerful tapestry. That tapestry became Weaver, our flagship product, a predictive analytics engine that grew from a whisper in a basement to the foundational tool for hundreds of global logistics companies. I remember one particularly grueling week, fueled by stale pizza and sheer will, trying to solve a catastrophic memory leak before our first major client demo. My daughter, Maya, then just a toddler, was asleep on a nest of coats in the corner, her small breaths a steady counterpoint to the frantic clicking of my keyboard. At 4 a.m., as the first gray light of a Portland dawn filtered through the grimy windows, the final bug resolved. I pushed the build, scooped my sleeping daughter into my arms, and felt a sense of creation so profound it was almost holy. That code, born in exhaustion and love, became the heart of Weaver. Back then, my name was synonymous with Ethelgard's innovation. Now, 20 years later, I was just a ghost haunting the hallways of the gleaming, steel and glass campus we'd built on the riverfront. You know you're invisible when people start talking about your work like you died. That thought, quiet and sharp as a shard of glass, found me one misty Tuesday morning. I was sitting in the corner of Nourish, our company's bright, airy cafeteria, cradling a mug of coffee. Across the room, a group of young, bright-eyed software engineers were clustered around Ben Carter, the company's new golden boy. Ben was brilliant, I'd give him that. I'd hired him myself 3 years ago, fresh out of his master's program at Oregon State. I saw the spark in him, the same passion for elegant solutions that had once burned so brightly in me. I had mentored him, spent countless hours walking him through the intricate architecture of Weaver, teaching him not just the how, but the why of its design. Now he was standing in front of a digital whiteboard, enthusiastically sketching out a diagram. And by restructuring the caching logic this way, he was saying, his voice ringing with the easy confidence of youth, we've managed to boost processing speeds by 30%. It's a complete reimagining of the core. A faint, wistful smile touched my lips. The core, my core. The caching logic he was so proudly reimagining was a system I had designed a decade ago, one snowy Christmas Eve, while Maya was at her father's and the house was achingly quiet. I'd done it to solve a bottleneck that was throttling our biggest client. It was a solution born of loneliness and a deep, abiding love for the puzzle. But no one in that circle of bright faces looked my way. They didn't see the woman in the corner who had laid the very foundation they were building upon. They hadn't, not really, for a long time. The shift had been subtle at first, a slow, creeping tide of irrelevance. It began with my name being left off a key strategy meeting invitation, an oversight, they'd said. Then my team of senior developers was reassigned, distributed among younger project leads for cross-generational synergy. Last month, my spacious corner office, the one with a view of the Fremont Bridge and the gentle curve of the Willamette River, was given to a new VP of growth. I was moved to a smaller, internal office, a glass box with no window, to foster better accessibility for the junior teams. The writing wasn't just on the wall, it was etched onto the nameplate of my new, smaller door. I had simply chosen not to read it, perhaps because acknowledging it would make it too real. The catalyst for this cultural shift had a name: Julian Croft. He'd been appointed CEO 6 months prior, a charismatic import from a Silicon Valley disruptor, with a dazzling smile, a wardrobe of expensive, casual wear, and a vocabulary peppered with terms like paradigm-shifting agile sprints and future-forward ideation. The board was captivated by his energy. The investors were enthralled by his promises of a lean, mean, modern Ethelgard, poised for a lucrative public offering. I knew what his arrival meant. You don't bring in a man like Julian to maintain the status quo. You bring him in to burn the old growth to make way for the new. I saw the careful, calculated way he promoted younger, hungrier managers. I saw the way he spoke of the company's history as a legacy foundation, a quaint but ultimately outdated starting point for his grand vision. I knew my time was limited. What I hadn't anticipated was the chillingly impersonal efficiency of the execution. It came on a Thursday, a day so quintessentially Portland it was almost a cliché. The sky was a sheet of bruised lavender, and a steady, soft rain whispered against the window panes. A calendar invitation appeared in my inbox, its subject line a masterpiece of corporate euphemism: Organizational Realignment Synergy Session. The attendees were myself, Julian Croft, and Catherine from Human Resources. A cold knot formed in my stomach, but I clicked accept. I spent a little extra time getting ready that morning, choosing a favorite silk blouse and a well-tailored blazer. It was a small act of self-respect, a quiet refusal to show up as a victim. It was the armor of a woman who had seen enough of life to know that you face the firing squad with your head held high. The conference room, named Innovation, was on the top floor, a sterile white space with panoramic views of the weeping sky. Julian and Catherine were already there, seated at the long, polished table. They both wore the same expression of practiced, compassionate regret. "Alara," Julian began, his voice smooth and placating. He steepled his fingers, a gesture I'm sure he'd learned in some executive coaching seminar. "First and foremost, I want to express our profound gratitude. What you have built here, it's the bedrock of Ethelgard. Truly." I met his gaze and held it, offering nothing but a quiet, patient silence. He cleared his throat, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. "But as you know, the market is in a state of constant evolution. To prepare for our next chapter, for the IPO, we need to restructure for maximum agility and a more dynamic leadership profile. Consequently, we are making the difficult decision to dissolve the principal systems weaver position." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Your role will be eliminated, effective at the end of the month." I nodded slowly, the cold knot in my stomach hardening into something solid and heavy. I had expected it, but the finality of the words still stole the air from my lungs. Catherine slid a thick, beige folder across the table. "We've put together a comprehensive severance package, Alara," she said, her voice gentle but firm. 9 months' salary, a full year of continued health benefits, and access to an executive outplacement service to help you with your next steps. 9 months. For 20 years of my life. For the nights spent away from my daughter, for the weekends sacrificed, for the very soul I had poured into the lines of code that would fund their glorious IPO. The irony was so bitter it tasted like metal. I didn't say a word. I simply looked at Julian, at this man who was half my age, who was dismantling my life's work with the detached air of someone reorganizing a spreadsheet. He couldn't hold my gaze. He looked away, out at the rain-streaked city. What he didn't know, what no one in that sterile, white room knew, was that this wasn't an end. For months, as the tide of my irrelevance had risen, I had felt something else rising within me, a quiet, stubborn refusal to be erased. They saw a relic to be gracefully retired. They had no idea they were about to awaken a founder. The following morning, I arrived at 7:30 a.m., the same time I had for 20 years. It was a habit born of a love for the quiet hum of the office before the day truly began. But when I held my access card to the reader at the glass doors of the engineering wing, it didn't flash green. It beeped, a curt, dismissive sound, and a small red light glowed with an unnerving finality. Access denied. I stood there for a moment, blinking at the red light, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. I wasn't just being let go, I was being locked out. A few seconds later, Ben Carter walked up, a cardboard tray of coffees in his hand. He saw me, and a wave of crimson washed over his face. He fumbled with his own card, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Oh, hey, Alara. Let me get that for you," he stammered, buzzing the door open. He wouldn't look at me. As I walked past him, he mumbled, "I'm sorry. I didn't know they'd." His voice trailed off. "It's all right, Ben," I said, and to my own surprise, my voice was calm and even. My office, the small glass box, felt alien. The nameplate on the door was gone, leaving a blank, silver rectangle. On my computer, my corporate email and messaging accounts were already deactivated. My access to the Ethelgard code repository, the digital world I had spent 2 decades building, was revoked. I had been digitally, efficiently, and silently excised. Later that day, Julian sent out a company-wide email announcing a bold new chapter for the engineering department. He spoke of streamlining leadership and empowering next-generation talent. My name was never mentioned. It was as if I had simply evaporated. The sting of it was sharp and real. This wasn't just a job. Weaver wasn't just a product. It was a living history of my mind, my passion, my sacrifices. Every elegant algorithm, every robust error-handling protocol was a story. A story of a late-night breakthrough, of a frustrating dead end, of a collaboration with a colleague who had long since moved on. They weren't just erasing an employee, they were erasing the storyteller. That evening, Maya came over. She walked in, took one look at my face, and wrapped me in a fierce hug. She had her father's height but my eyes, and in them, I saw a reflection of my own strength, untempered by years of compromise. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered into my hair. We sat on my porch swing, watching the last of the daylight fade behind the dripping cedar trees. I told her everything, the cold meeting, the locked-out access card, the unsettling silence from people I had considered friends. "So, what are you going to do?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't know," I confessed. "Take the severance. Work in my garden. Maybe finally learn how to make a decent sourdough starter." Maya turned to face me, her expression serious. "No, that's not what I mean. For years, I've watched you give everything to that place. You defined yourself by it. They take, and you just let them. You let them move your office. You let them take your team. Now, they're trying to take your whole story. Are you going to let them do that, too?" Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow because they were true. I had become so accustomed to being the quiet, reliable foundation that I had forgotten how to be the architect. I had allowed my boundaries to erode, one small compromise at a time, until there was almost nothing left of the woman who had started it all. "What else can I do, honey?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's their company." "Is it?" she challenged. "Is Weaver their creation?" The turning point came a week later. Ethelgard held a town hall to unveil the new roadmap and rally the troops for the upcoming IPO push. An anonymous email had landed in my inbox that morning with the subject line, "You should see this." Attached was a single slide from the presentation deck. It showed a timeline of Weaver's development. The early years were summarized in a single bullet point: initial framework established by early team. The rest of the timeline was a glowing tribute to the 2024 innovation cohort, with Ben Carter's name featured prominently. I stood at the very back of the packed auditorium, my arms crossed, a silent observer in the theater of my own erasure. Ben was on stage, poised and charismatic. He was walking the audience through the new features of Weaver 2.0, the version they were pinning their IPO hopes on. He pointed to a complex architectural diagram on the screen behind him. This new distributed processing model, he announced proudly, is what will allow us to scale infinitely. It's a complete rebuild from the ground up, designed for the future. My heart, which I thought had been numbed, began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The diagram he was pointing at. I had drawn it. Not in the office, not on a company whiteboard. I had drawn it on a series of napkins at a little coffee shop on Division Street on a rainy Saturday months ago after Julian's team had formally rejected my proposal to fund the research for a next-generation architecture. They had called it not a current strategic priority. The project, which I had secretly codenamed Loom, had become my private passion. It was an answer to a question no one at Ethelgard was asking yet: how to make Weaver not just faster, but smarter, more intuitive, almost alive. I worked on it at home, on my own time, on my personal machine. I built it not out of obligation, but out of a fierce, protective love for the craft and for the potential I still saw in my creation. It was my art, my secret garden, a place where I was still the weaver, not the relic. After Ben's presentation, someone from the back, a young intern I vaguely recognized, raised her hand. I was just wondering, she asked timidly, how much of Dr. Vance's original architecture is still in this new version? Ben gave a practiced, magnanimous chuckle. Alara laid some fantastic groundwork, absolutely. But Weaver 2.0 is a different beast entirely. It's a new build, for a new era. I didn't stay for the Q&A. I walked out of the auditorium, the applause for Ben ringing in my ears. I walked through the gleaming campus I had helped build, and I didn't stop until I was home, standing in my quiet study. The room was lined with books, and on my desk sat my personal laptop. On the screen was the code for Loom. I looked at the beige folder from HR, the one with the severance agreement, and the intellectual property reassignment form they expected me to sign, the one that would hand over any and all ideas I'd ever had, implemented or not. They wanted my silence. They wanted my signature. They wanted to own not just my past, but my future. Maya's words echoed in my mind. Are you going to let them do that? And in the quiet of my study, surrounded by the work I had created out of pure passion, I found my answer. No. The next morning, I called Grace Atherton, an old friend from my college days who had become one of the city's most respected intellectual property lawyers. I sat in her calm, sunlit office, overlooking the South Park blocks, and I told her everything. I showed her the dates on my original employment contract from 20 years ago, a time when Ethelgard was a startup with no formal IP policy beyond a standard, vaguely worded clause. I showed her my detailed, time-stamped records for Loom, the Git commits from my personal repository, the dated entries in my digital notebook, the receipts for the cloud servers I'd paid for myself to run simulations. Grace listened intently, her expression shifting from sympathy to a focused, steely concentration. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Alara, she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. They haven't just been disrespectful. They've been sloppy. The language in your original contract is key. It grants them ownership of work done using company resources during company time. This, she gestured to the impressive stack of documentation I'd brought, is demonstrably none of that. This is yours. And it's beautiful. A weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't just about legal standing, it was validation. Someone saw my work, my secret garden, and called it beautiful. The plan we formulated wasn't born of vengeance, but of a quiet, profound need for reclamation. It was about drawing a boundary, not just for myself, but for every quiet creator who had ever been told their time was up. I spent my final days at Ethelgard in a state of calm resolve. I packed my personal belongings, each object a small ghost of a memory. I smiled at my colleagues, many of whom averted their eyes, caught in the awkward space between sympathy and self-preservation. When Ben, Looking deeply uncomfortable, asked if I would give him a recommendation on LinkedIn. I agreed without hesitation. I wrote a glowing review of his technical skills and his passion, and I meant every word. My fight was not with him. It was with a system that had rewarded his ambition by teaching him to erase his own history. On my last day, Catherine from HR stopped by my desk. Just a reminder, Alara, we need the signed exit documents by the end of today. Of course, I said, handing her the beige folder. I've gone through them. I had signed the standard NDA, but I had drawn a clean, firm line through the entire intellectual property reassignment clause, initialing it with a steady hand. She took the folder without a second glance. In the rush to process my exit, no one would likely notice until it was far too late. As I walked out of the Ethelgard building for the last time, I didn't look back. I was walking towards something else. 2 days earlier, Grace had arranged a discreet meeting. In a private room at a quiet downtown hotel, I had met with the executive team of Confluence Systems, Ethelgard's main competitor. They weren't slick disruptors. They were a solid, established company known for their engineering prowess and their respect for deep technical expertise. I didn't present Loom as a weapon. I presented it as a work of art. I walked them through the elegance of its design, the philosophy behind its structure. Their CTO, a woman about my age with sharp, intelligent eyes, understood immediately. This isn't an iteration, she said, her voice filled with genuine awe. This is a generational leap. It's what we've been trying to build for 5 years. We didn't talk about market share or crushing the competition. We talked about a partnership. We talked about a licensing deal that would name me as the sole inventor. We talked about giving me a lab, a team, and the resources to continue my work, not as an employee, but as a valued creator. By the time I walked out of Ethelgard's doors, the intent to license was signed, and a press release was being drafted. The day of Ethelgard's big pre-IPO press conference dawned bright and clear. The financial news outlets were buzzing with anticipation. Julian was on the morning business shows, his smile dazzling, talking about the new era of innovation at Ethelgard. At 9 a.m., their press release went live. At 9:05 a.m., ours did. Confluence Systems announces exclusive licensing of Loom architecture from acclaimed systems weaver Alara Vance. The release was a masterpiece of legal precision and quiet power. It detailed the nature of the next-generation predictive engine, announced the filing of my provisional patents, and included a carefully worded statement from me. Loom was a personal project, developed in my own time, born from a deep love for solving complex problems. I am thrilled to partner with a company like Confluence that shares my passion for true, foundational innovation. I wasn't watching the news or tracking social media. I was in my garden, my hands deep in the cool, damp earth, planting dahlia tubers for the summer. My phone, which I'd left on the porch railing, began to buzz incessantly. A text from a former colleague. What did you do? Julian's office is chaos. An email from a panicked Ethelgard lawyer. A missed call from a number I recognized as Julian's private line. I ignored them all and went inside to put the kettle on. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my tea as the story unfolded. The financial press, smelling blood in the water, pivoted instantly. The narrative shifted from Ethelgard's bright future to a brewing IP crisis. How could the crown jewel of their IPO, the reimagined Weaver 2.0, be based on an architecture they didn't own? Late in the afternoon, my phone rang again. It was Maya. "Mom," she said, her voice a mix of awe and laughter. "You're trending. Is that a good thing?" I asked, genuinely unsure. "In this case," she said, "it's a very good thing. People are calling you a legend." The fallout for Ethelgard was swift and brutal. Their IPO was put on indefinite hold. Their board launched an internal investigation. The story became a case study in the tech world about the dangers of undervaluing institutional knowledge and the hubris of a culture that prizes youth over experience. Within a month, Julian Croft had quietly resigned. I never felt a sense of triumph, not in the way you'd expect. There was no gloating, no desire to see them fail. There was only a profound, quiet sense of peace. I had not set out to burn their house down. I had simply refused to let them own mine. A few weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived in my mailbox. The postmark was from Portland. The handwriting was neat, but hesitant. It was from Ben. "Dear Alara," it began. "I don't expect you to read this, and I certainly don't expect you to forgive me. There is no excuse for my actions. I was ambitious, and I was a coward. You taught me everything, and I let myself believe the story they were telling, the one where your work was the past and I was the future. I took the credit for your brilliance because it was easier than standing up for the truth. I see that now. The diagram I presented at the town hall, it was yours. I knew it, and I presented it anyway. That is a failure I will have to live with for the rest of my career. I don't know what else to say, except that I am sorry, and that I hope one day I can become half the engineer you are, not just in skill, but in integrity. Sincerely, Ben Carter." I read the letter twice. I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of my writing desk. I didn't feel anger, only a deep, quiet sorrow for the young man who had lost his way, and a flicker of hope that he might yet find it again. My life is different now. I spend my days at Confluence, in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the river. They call it the Loom Lab. My team is small, comprised of brilliant minds of all ages who share a passion for the work itself. We don't talk about disruption, we talk about creation. Our meetings are filled with respectful debate and genuine curiosity. When I speak, people listen, not because of my title, but because of the stories and the experience I bring. But my identity is no longer solely defined by those four walls. I leave work at 5. I spend my evenings with Maya, or on my porch swing, or in my garden, watching the slow, beautiful unfurling of the dahlias. I have learned that boundaries are not walls to keep others out, but fences to protect the sacred ground within. I have learned that my value is not something a company can bestow upon me or take away. It is inherent, forged in the quiet hours of creation and the steadfast refusal to be erased. My legacy, I realize now, is not the code I wrote for Ethelgard. It's not the licensing deal or the headlines. It's the quiet garden of my own self-respect, cultivated over a lifetime, that I've finally learned to protect. And it's the understanding that true innovation, like a well-tended garden, doesn't have an expiration date. It simply changes with the seasons, forever growing, forever blooming in its own time.